Hello, welcome to the Tennessee Informer. I'm your host, Dave Vance. Our guest tonight is Kathy Harms with Tennessee Fair Elections. We'll be taking a look at our current system and discussing election integrity and see if we're where we need to be. But first, if you have an announcement from a conservative organization that you would like to broadcast on this show, please send the information to tninformer.tv@gmail.com the Friday before the show. If you want our state to stand up to federal overreach, the best way to do that is support the nullification process bill sponsored by Senator Bowling and Representative Holsey that they intend to bring back next session. Visit tncss.weebly.com/call to action, sign a petition, and follow the instructions on the link. Our state senators and reps need to know we want this legislation passed when they return in January. Now is also the time to get candidates for state office on record as well. D.C. will never fix D.C. Only the states can fix D.C., and we have to demand that our state stand up to D.C. and uphold their oath to the U.S. and Tennessee Constitution. The Maury County Reagan Day event will be Friday, June 14th, 6 p.m. at Puckett's Restaurant in Columbia. Guests include Todd Starnes, Representative Andy Ogles, Representative Tim Burchett, and Tony Lauren. Tickets are $100 per. Visit murraytngop.com for more details. Our guest tonight is Kathy Harms. Kathy has been an advocate for election integrity since the 2020 elections, and Kathy has joined with Andrea Gomez from Citizens for Renewing America to form the Tennessee Fair Elections Coalition. Both Kathy and Andrea have worked in partnership with the Election Integrity Network headed by Cleta Mitchell. These efforts have put together a coalition of grassroots citizens that are becoming educated in the many parts of the electoral process in order to ensure that Tennessee does not succumb to the failed policies of other states. Elections are ecosystems with a myriad of factors that must be addressed in order to have confidence in election integrity. Both Andrea and Kathy seek to encourage others to see how they can become informed and involved across the state of Tennessee to ensure elections are secure, auditable, and accessible. Thank you for being with us tonight. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you for having me, Dave.
Well, it's great to have you, and I think this is something everybody needs to hear about with the elections coming up, and I know a lot of people are concerned, and so I really appreciate what you and Andrea do, and I'm glad to have you on here. I'm going to go over the mission statement for your organization because I think everybody needs to hear it, and this is for Tennessee Fair Elections. Make it easy to vote and hard to cheat in the state of Tennessee. Provide a resource for legislators and heads of state so that they understand what is happening on the ground. Protect the state's constitutional system that grants primary authority for election systems and administration to the state, not the federal government. Create a resource that supports and sustains groups, leaders, public officials, and grassroots activists in Tennessee to be permanently engaged in protecting voting rights and the integrity of Tennessee's elections. And that pretty much sums it up. So let me we'll just get started right away. In your assessment right now, what are the strengths and weaknesses of our laws in Tennessee in regards to the election, or in regards to election integrity?
Right. Well, first of all, there's no perfect system. You're not. If there were, we could all just go home. We wouldn't have to. But we're a self-governing nation, and there's always people involved. When people involved, we're all fallible, and stuff happens. Nothing is perfect. There are three parts, in my opinion, to the elections that are those three parts that are the most critical. You have to authenticate your voter, authenticate the ballot, and authenticate the count. And there are vulnerabilities in all three. You can't, and I'm not saying Tennessee is the most vulnerable. We have some great laws that other states don't have, but there's always evolving risks and vulnerabilities in the election process. We've been watching that unfold since 2020. These are not static systems. They are not static environments. Laws that were good 15 years ago need sometimes tweaking and updating to address the challenges of today, and that's where we find ourselves. We are probably the number one concern going into the 2020 election is the border crisis because of the Biden EO 14019 that has created a nightmare on the border, but that has created a situation where every state is a border state. And so we have a new coalition nationally called Only Citizens Vote. and we are working with that. And so you have that. So that's number one. That's the first one. Authenticate the voter. If you don't have the right eligible people voting, you're not going to get the right ballots being produced, and so your count is going to be wrong. So we have vulnerabilities there. Clean voter rolls. We're working with our crew and people across the country for best practices to make sure that the people that are on our voter rolls are eligible voters. So this and the SAVE Act, there's a lot of pieces to this. So number one is the voter. And to make sure that we have only eligible voters voting and we don't have people on our voter rolls that shouldn't be there. And then when from there you got the ballot, and there's some vulnerabilities there. We are working. You've seen all the problems with the machines, and I rarely talk about machines because I don't have to. It's just a no-brainer to say that when you can't see something and it's not transparent, you could have issues. And so we've always advocated to secure our hand-marked paper ballot in the state of Tennessee, and that means to have security markings. We watched Bruce Griffey and Joey Hensley were able to pass legislation a few years ago to put a watermark on the absentees. That's one of our strengths of our state is we don't have drop boxes, and we don't have no excuse absentee ballots. You can't just get an absentee ballot. You have to apply. You can't do it on your first election, and we can control that a little bit better, meaning we don't have drop boxes. Where we do have a vulnerability in that is that we have 7 counties now with vote centers where you're not voting in a precinct anymore. And we feel that the more that centralizes the count process when you get out of the precinct, and centralized accounting is always a problem, which then goes to the tabulation. How are you going to authenticate the count? Because we're using machines to count. That's not so much a problem if we had a secure hand-marked paper ballot that was produced, and then you had something post-election to look at. So we do a lot of good things in the state of Tennessee. Anybody who says there's never any room for improvement, no matter what you're working on, you've got to be suspect. We want to be a support to our legislators and to our state officials. We are not adversaries, and we hope we're not adversaries. And when we try to have these conversations, we try to bring good data with sound reasoning.
You mentioned the voting centers. They have one of these here in Henry County where the studio is. Back to the illegals for a minute. So what are some of the challenges with making sure that illegals don't vote?
Okay, well, we have the open border. We know now that Biden is giving emergency authorization to a lot of these people that come in, and then they can get a Social Security card. If they get a Social Security card, then they get a number, and that can create a problem. And this is what some of the concerns that we've had. We've been part of a coalition nationally, and what we're seeing is if you don't have good checks and balances, we have voter ID in our state. But that voter ID law was passed before our citizen law was passed. So the voter ID doesn't quite match up because not every piece of voter ID that we use at the polls for voting has citizenship on it. However, if they get a driver's license in the state of Tennessee, you have to show a documented proof of citizenship, right? You have to produce a birth certificate or something, a passport. Well, the problem is that even though they do that, if they don't have that, they can prove that they have authorized temporary status in the country because Biden's allowing that, through this emergency authorization. So if they get a driver's license, the good news and the bad news is in the state of Tennessee, they can still get a driver's license. And we don't differentiate between legal and illegal. We just say citizen versus non-citizen. Only citizens federally can vote in federal elections. Only citizens, according to our state constitution, can vote. And we even passed legislation to affirm that only citizens can vote in our elections. So how are we making sure that that happens? We have, again, processes that were in place prior to Biden's EO, prior to immigration laws that weren't being properly enforced. And so what we are asking for is if they do get a driver's license, because they can get one, there is a temporary status noted on the front of that license. And the class has an X that indicates they have a legal presence here They've been issued this driver's license or this identification at the DMV that is, it's legal that they can use that, but when they go to vote, they shouldn't be able to use that as identification to vote because it says temporary. But we've never really checked it because we haven't had a problem. So we're looking to say, there are some things maybe we should be doing. Maybe we should be posting signs in the polling place. Remember, we passed that legislation about crossover voting,
Right.
in the primaries. There's nothing to say. Even HAVA law says, the Help America Vote Act, which was passed in the early 2000s, says, yeah, you can post things at the polling places. You should probably post things like, what's the process for voting? What's the process for a provisional ballot? And what are your state laws? Well, our state law says you have to be a citizen to vote. We should remind people, because we are concerned that two things could happen. Well-meaning people that are here legally, that have come in the right way, may be getting hijacked by not so well-meaning people telling them and encouraging them to vote. I've had people say, well, who would do that? Well, we have a person we know of from another state who was told she's not a U.S. citizen, but you can vote. She didn't vote in Tennessee, but she voted in another state. So that can happen because they don't know our laws. And if they're relatively new to let's say they've been here a long time and they get a voter registration card by accident, which has happened in the past in the mail. And then there's this big push by, Biden is using these non-government organizations to push the vote. He's paying them basically with federal money. And if they're encouraging people to go register and to vote, that is something that is not so much on them, but it is encouraging. And then you have maybe people who are not here legally who get an identification and they're afraid. And we think those are vulnerable voters. We think they're vulnerable to being exploited by people that aren't good, people that are working with these non-government organizations that are very left-leaning. We all know that. And they are targeting poor populations, people who need services, people who don't understand things. And they could, in other states, it's going to be probably a bigger problem because of the absentee ballot. They could be getting these ballots. Other people could be filling them out. At least in the state of Tennessee in 2024, if it's their first time here, they won't be able to cast a ballot with absentee. So mostly the problem is, are we checking at the polls? Are we informing people enough that it is, you must be a citizen in the state in order to vote?
What are what are the state requirements on the poll workers or the people at the registration table? What are their requirements about ensuring that the people are citizens?
Well, the only thing with ID right now in the law is to make sure that the person that's presenting the ID is the person that's standing in front of you, and that the picture matches the person. They have not, again, and I'm not blaming them. I'm saying this is not where we had a problem in the past. So they probably just aren't aware and hadn't been instructed because they hadn't had this problem before. Now we have this situation. We know that there are safeguards that we can take. And so we're working with people that are in election commission offices. We're working with the Secretary of State, working with the state coordinator of election to see what can we do to tighten this up and to tighten up the voter rolls. The best thing to do is not get people on the voter rolls, because it's on the voter rolls that if they weren't on the voter rolls and they appear at your polling place, they're not going to be able to vote anyway. But if they are on the voter roll, that's a bigger problem. So our goal is to make sure first that they're not on the rolls. And that would be, working with the Department of Motor Vehicles, Department of Safety, and making sure that we don't have people who are getting registered who should never have been registered to begin with. That's where it starts, is authenticate the voter first, make sure they're not on the rolls so that our poll workers have less of an issue at the polls.
Okay. Are you able to adjust that shade just a little bit? The sun is...
let me just do a little something here and I'll take care of that.
Okay.
You keep talking.
Okay. Anyway, I know that there was legislation proposed this year that had to do with the driver's license, I guess making them more identifiable. I don't remember the specifics. I know in the House, Jody Barrett had the bill. I don't remember who had it in the Senate. I don't know what I don't think it passed this year, but I think it was going to make those who were not citizens with a driver's license put some sort of code on it or something to make it easier to identify. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about?
Yes, and I believe that he'll probably bring that back next year. But the license that we currently have is probably sufficient for this election because it does say temporary. What we're really hoping to get is all of our voter ID, anything that we use for elections, to have citizenship noted on it so that if you're going to cast a ballot and you're presenting ID, again, like I said, that voter ID law was passed prior to the law passed on citizenship. So we need to marry those and adjust. And so we need to get legislation passed that maybe tightens up our voter ID, what you can use at the polls. The driver's license is actually the best one right now because we can identify that.
Right. Now, you said you're working with the state to make sure that we can do as much as possible with the laws we have right now, and that the word's getting down to all the counties about what to do and what to look for. But I mean, we're less than 2 months out from early voting. What has the state done? I would think the state would be very proactive. I would have hoped that they would be very proactive on this. What are you finding? Are they concerned to the degree they should be, in your opinion?
Well, it wasn't mentioned, I know, at the last administrator training, which was a disappointment because we just had a major ring busted up in Knox County, if you read about that, where there was a couple working at the Department of Safety issuing fake birth certificates and driver's licenses, which is a real problem. We're grateful that the FBI was involved with that and that was caught, but that's a kink in the armor. We just had felons arrested that voted in Sumner County that were on the voter rolls. What we want to do more of is what are we doing to check our voter rolls? Because that's where this starts. If we have clean voter rolls, and we won't have a problem. People won't be registered that shouldn't be. And I think there are things I know the state does. A lot of it they keep under the they tell us that they're doing it. We want a little more transparency. We would ask for more reporting at the county level so that the counties would have the data. More robust, maybe checks and balances with the Department of Safety and the Social Security Administration. There are limitations on what we can do because you cannot ask by federal law. When the National Voter Registration Act was passed in '93, it said you cannot ask a person if they're a citizen. There's a box, so it's the honor system. There's a box on the voter registration card. Are you a U.S. citizen? And it says on our card it's a felony if you vote, but if they check that box and it says yes, we need more robust checks with the federal government because if they get identification like a Social Security, we need to know that the Department of Safety is checking it. When that Help America Vote Act was passed, it mandated that states have a relationship with the with the Social Security Administration to do those checks. We're not clear on how often they're done. And we know that if they're not done often enough, we're going to end up with a lot of people on the voter rolls. We're doing checks as citizen groups right now, and we're finding right now levels of people that through the national change of address that have moved out of state and different counties, and we're going to be cycling that back up to the state to ask them to help us understand why these people are still active on our voter rolls. And so we're saying if there's a problem like what happened in Knox, if there's a problem like what happened in Sumner, what happened, who found it, what caused it to have these people there that didn't belong there, what can we do to close the gap, what's missing in our current law. And honestly, it's been a little difficult in the last few years because I think that people that are in state government thought that we were accusing people of fraud. That's not the case. What we're saying is citizens can see things differently, and they're looking for transparency. And until you have it, it really weakens the confidence level. And if they find people that don't belong on the voter rolls, I had a person just this week say, I bought my house in 2023, and there are 4 people that are not me registered to vote at this house. Well, that can set off people and it's alarming. There might be a reasonable explanation. You have to go through some process just to remove people. But on the other hand, if it was transparent, easy for us to access, I don't think that people would be as concerned. So it's a little bit of we're going in fits and starts. We make progress sometimes, and other times we get a little bit of pushback, but that's okay. I think that iron sharpens iron, and both sides can work together.
I think it's wrong that the federal government can tell us that we can't ask if they're a citizen. Elections are supposed to be conducted at the state level, and that's just, and to me, that's just more federal overreach, which is par for the course. But back to the situation where you said you had somebody that I guess recently bought a house, and that's their new address, and then they find out that 3 or 4 other people are using that address or are registered under that address. So what happens there? How do they get to the bottom of that?
Well, first thing we look to find out, did they move out of state? If they moved out of state, they should have been removed. Generally, if somebody could be moved within the state and they just didn't, we don't have their change of address, and so this information is still going there. There is a process. Federal law makes you send out a postcard, and then you have to go through a couple election cycles before you can remove them from the voter rolls. But if they've died or if they've moved out of state, they can be removed. So she'll take it to her commission, have those names checked to see what work have they done to identify these people and remove them from the voter rolls. So that's where we work with our county election commission offices to help them. We're not here to hurt them, but when something comes up, and we're working with a couple groups, Tennessee Fair Elections is modeled after the Election Integrity Network that Cleta Mitchell runs, and they have a voter roll working group, a legislative working group, and our voter roll working group is now able to use an app, so to speak, an application called Check My Vote. And people can go, and that's how this woman found these people at her house. And we're doing that now for entire county voter rolls to be able to look and see how many people should have been removed, and then help the state, because we don't know how often they check the national change of address. We know they have to do it every 2 years, but this is where you tweak the law and say, if we find a lot of problems, we'll go back in and say, maybe we should be doing this more frequently. And because there's too many people. But remember, going back to your comment about the federal government, that law was passed when people were obeying immigration laws and we didn't have open borders. The good news is at the federal level, there is a bill that was introduced by Chip Roy called the SAVE Act. That means Secure American Voter Eligibility. That's all about making sure that the people that are voting are eligible. And we think it's going to be brought up in the next week or so to be voted on in the House. It should come out of committee this week. We have several legislators from the state of Tennessee who came on board to support that, co-sponsoring it in the House, and then our own legislators in the state of Tennessee that have come out in support of that bill. And we're hoping it gets the attention. It may not pass, obviously, the Senate, but we have Mike Leake co-sponsoring this in the Senate. We have great legislators in the Senate, senators coming on board with it there. And this is something that has to be addressed. And so in the meantime, we bring attention to it at the state level, helping every state find ways to accommodate and change this. I was on a call today with Heritage. They're working on the exact same things that we're talking about, putting signs up at the polls. If you have voter ID, check the any voter ID you have that could indicate citizenship. Make sure you have a campaign in your state that reminds people only citizens can vote. There will be public service announcements from nonprofits you're going to see come out. There's going to be a bit of a campaign on this, I think, going into the election.
Well, I'm glad we've got volunteer groups doing all this. I'm glad for what you guys are doing and other organizations, but isn't this what our state election commission should be doing?
Well, we hope that they will. I mean, let's be honest and fair. Going through this last winter, we did get 4 good bills passed. We had data mining on the college campuses where 97% of our kids go to school, and their data was being taken over by Democrat nonprofits, and they were being data mined. We had some voter registration by third parties tightened up. We had a few bills that really were good. The issue that kind of popped up on the radar on citizenship, even though the Biden EO has been around since 2021, nobody was talking about it. And so there wasn't a lot of momentum behind it to be, and of course, it's something that we should be doing. I'm hoping there are things that voluntarily our election commission at the state level will do what they can do without having to pass a new law, such as put up signs, such as make sure people understand that it's a felony if they register. Robust checks on the social securities and the driver's licenses at the polls. I don't think some of that really requires new legislation.
Right.
But maybe we can do some things to get that done for this election cycle.
Yeah, enforce the laws on the books, in other words.
Correct.
Yeah. Now, so you said it's a felony for registering to vote if you're not eligible, or voting if you're not eligible. Is that
correct? Correct. And you can be deported if you, and they know, and a lot of people don't know that. I think people should know. I mean, these are vulnerable. In many cases, they're not nefarious people. But if they've lived here for years and they're being told, yeah, you can go vote, it's shame on us for not catching it for them, in my opinion. Why put them in the position if they're being told by somebody who works for the government or represents the government, and they say, yeah, you can vote? They're not watching this. They're not on my Zoom calls on election integrity. We know that. We know we have a lot of low information voters. We should be making sure we're warning them, because if they want to become a citizen down the road and they get caught committing a felony, they won't be able to become a citizen.
Yeah, and it would be good to put that up there so that they know. Of course, you'd have to put it in probably a few different languages so that they all understood what the potential penalties are. So was there anything else legislation-wise that got through this year that you wanted to talk about?
Well, those were two of the big ones we were really happy with. And we did get actually one that does have to do with citizenship, and that was making sure that the state was mandated to check some of these other agencies to make sure that we didn't have non-citizens on the voter rolls. So there was Brian Ritchie ran that bill. That was HB 0835, and that also got passed. And so we had some progress there when it comes to citizenship.
And next year, what are you guys going to be bringing back?
Well, one of the key things that we want to put up was, first of all, we want to tighten up our voter ID. I mean, that's number one. Number two, we want to secure, if we're going to use, this is a big one that everybody's got a problem with, that's concerned about elections. We have a law in the state of Tennessee that says you have to have a voter verified paper ballot. Now that sounds really good, right? Voter verified, and a machine a lot of times creates that ballot, and you punch in and it pops out a piece of paper. The problem is there's QR codes on those that people can't read. There's a difference between a voter verified paper ballot and a voter verifiable ballot. You can't know that barcode goes into that machine and reads exactly the way you voted.
Right.
Also, there was a study done in 2019 at the University of Tennessee, and I think they found maybe 19% of everybody looked at their ballot after it popped out of the machine more than a couple seconds. That's not a high amount. So if you're not doing it yourself, filling in those ovals, is it a voter verifiable ballot with a QR code? Currently, there is a lawsuit in the state of Georgia called Raffensperger. It's the Raffensperger case, where there's Curling versus Raffensperger, and we're waiting for the judge to rule on whether or not the QR code with a ballot marking device, which a lot of counties are using, if it's legal in the state of Georgia. If that goes down, it's going to have a tremendous effect. But Georgia was able, despite that, even waiting on that, they passed legislation that makes QR codes illegal, that you cannot use them, that the ballot has to be read by the human readable text when it goes into the machine. The tabulator has to read what's written on the ballot. And the reason for that is post-election, when you're going to do an audit, you have to know the voter's intent was secured, that whatever's on that piece of paper is what the voter intended. And so that's the only way to do it, because what they proved in the Raffensperger case was that even though somebody punched in certain names, they don't check their ballot. They cast it and they can change the names. They can, I mean, even the printed paper can be different than what we're using. We don't have robust enough audits in the state of Tennessee. We only have a risk limiting audit. It's very tailored. It's a very minute amount. And without a full audit with a human readable text, there's no way to know the voter's intent was protected. So we want voter ID. We want to get rid of QR codes. Another piece of legislation we want is markings for security on the ballots. Back in the day, and there are still some counties that use a hand-marked paper ballot, they have security markings on them. They know pre-election how many ballots they bought, already ready to go with everybody's name on it. They know post-election how many ballots they ended up with. So you can't have suitcases just producing ballots. Right now, in 2020, in the state of Tennessee, any machine that produces a ballot, they eliminated the mandate to have security markings in 2020. So if it's produced by a machine, if you ever voted on an ES&S machine, the paper is blank when it goes in, totally blank. There's no security on it. We want at least a watermark, and that takes me to the next piece of legislation, because we really would like a randomized number on them. And the only way that can work is if you're voting in a precinct. If you're voting in a vote center, you can't possibly have every ballot type floating around a vote center. There's too many different ballot types. Then you could be giving the person the wrong ballot. If you're in a vote center, we want to go back and mandate precinct-only voting in the state of Tennessee for this simple reason. We want to protect the purity of the ballot box and make sure that means the person gets the right ballot. So we want to go to ID, better ID, security markings on a ballot. We want them secured in a precinct, and we want them hand marked. That's our four major asks. In addition to that, there are some tweaks to some other parts of different kinds of legislation. We have our legislative priorities already established, like poll watchers, making sure we don't have problems getting poll watchers, that they can watch everything, those kinds of things. But those would be our four top. I think people want to know that they're in a precinct, they can fill out their own ballot, that they can account for those ballots. We have good bookkeeping on those ballots, and they're secure. And that and we want access. The final thing we want is post-election access to the ballots. Right now, nobody, not even an election worker, can undo those ballots without a court order. So what we want is, under the supervision of the election officers, access to, if we wanted to come in and recount those ballots, we could. Right now, Georgia passed a law that allows it. So we're following suit. Georgia's like a sister state for us. They were voted #1 in election integrity by Heritage, just like Tennessee was, and we know what happened in Georgia. So we're looking now to see what Georgia's doing to improve, and we think we can piggyback on some of those great initiatives.
So basically, though, this does involve getting rid of the machines ultimately. We just want a paper ballot that we mark. Is that part of the goal?
Well, right now that would get rid of ballot marking devices. That would get rid of ballot on demand. It would necessarily do that if we were in precincts. It would get rid of things like microvote, because the other problem with those machines, like everyone says, well, with microvote, it's behind a glass, right? That nobody can tamper. Well, the problem is, it's surfaced. They proved it for us in Pennsylvania. ES&S has a similar product. We always knew that when you see you make your selections, and then when you hit vote, it's a different function on the machine. So just because you see Dave doesn't mean Dave is what got put into the system. ES&S had this problem in Pennsylvania twice now, where it was now people were trying to vote for Dave, and somebody else's name came up, and ES&S actually said, "Don't worry about it, because when you push the button, it's going to really vote for Dave, even though the name was wrong." So, I mean, the whole thing was so convoluted. We are not saying that that has happened with microvote. I'm not making a claim here. I'm just saying it's a vulnerability. And we still should have we should have consistency, I think, across the state with a secure hand marked paper ballot. It is mandated in the state of Tennessee that everybody has to, you can't have a hand count, you have a tabulator. And I could live with that if we had better post-election artifacts and access to those artifacts, such as access to the ballots.
What are the different machines we use in Tennessee, and what are your concerns about the different ones?
Well, in some ways, because they're machines, it's kind of great that we don't only use one type of vendor, because then you have, like Georgia, you have one massive fail when one goes down.
Right.
We had the problem with Dominion and Williamson County, so they're no longer certified in the state of Tennessee. But we have several different versions of ES&S. We have, I believe it's Unisys. We have Microvote, and so people in some counties still do a hand marked paper ballot. I think Obion, Benton may still be doing it, where they pre-order the ballots. And so, from that standpoint, when you're talking the vendors, I'm kind of glad we're mixing it up a little bit. However, when it comes to the ballot itself, I don't think the vendor should have the control. I think it should be a independent vendor that creates the ballot from the machine that counts it, because then they're not married to each other. You can always program that counter, that tabulator, based on the markings of how to read the ballot. And I think it should be produced by a separate vendor.
And right now, if you want to check something, I mean, okay, are there patent issues? I mean, are the county officials limited on what they can do as far as checking something?
Yes, well, they do what's called a logic and accuracy test prior to an election, where they'll go in and they'll have different machines do maybe 50 ballots on each machine. And just to say, okay, did it do what we said it was going to do? Did it produce the ballot we said it was going to produce? Is it programmed correctly? The problem is it could produce 50 great ones, and the 51st one is the one where the problem is. And they're not all the same ones that are being deployed. You don't know, some of them didn't get checked. So the logic and accuracy, in our opinion, you can never do enough of it, because you can be programmed to screw up the one that you didn't check. So that's why, and you don't have any access to the program. It's proprietary software. It's black box. You've heard all of this before, black box technology. There's a lot of suspicion. People are suspicious. Are they connected to the internet? Aren't they connected to the internet? There's enough lack of voter confidence that to me, I don't understand the pushback. Even with the Election Assistance Commission, who on the federal level, quote unquote, certifies these, they don't take responsibility when there's a problem. And they didn't, like, for instance, we had the problem in Williamson County. Well, it's not really their problem, it's our problem. And you just don't know. You're not buying a car. It's like you can certify these machines all you want in a lab, but it's not, let's say it's a car. It's not the car they're delivering to you. Just because they said that model is going to do this doesn't mean the one that you get in your election office is as good as the one that they tested.
So, so you're telling me that they don't actually test the specific machines that are in these different voting places? They just test that model?
Correct. They do the logic and accuracy testing before, but that's not the same as going through the whole process of taking apart a machine. Nobody can take apart those machines. It's proprietary. It's owned by the vendor. The vendor has way too much control over the process. And there's a lot of money. It's $1 billion industry. It's going to be hard to change. But I think that depending, again, on what happens with Raffensperger, and if we can go back to precinct voting, take the ones, we only have a few counties so far that are doing vote centers. And they always say, well, it's for voter convenience. It's selling us something we didn't ask for. And what's more convenient? to be able to go down the street to the same place all the time that I've always voted in. It's easier than having to drive across town. You have less vote centers than you do precincts. Just let us go back to precinct voting. I think that it was supposed to increase voter turnout, Dave, but over 20 years' time in Williamson County, nothing's really changed. It's pretty much flatlined. We have very poor voter turnout. I really believe some of it is confusion about vote centers because sometimes they get moved. People don't know where they're supposed to vote. They don't remember when they're supposed to vote. So I think that we actually confuse the voter more than we help them.
Yeah.
And they say, well, we did studies and we saw this 60% of the people voted outside of their zip code. Well, maybe it's because they had to. There wasn't a vote center near my house. I had to go to another location.
Well, and I'm not really keen on necessarily more people voting. I want more informed voters voting, but there's a whole lot of people I'm not heartbroken at all if they don't vote. So I think we'd be better off if some of the people that are voting weren't voting. That's just my take on that. I want to back up a minute. You said something about the machine, so you might test it for the first 50, but it's set to go off on the 51st vote. So you're saying that if somebody was deliberately doing something nefarious, that it could be set up. How does that work? And have you got examples of that?
Well, you hear about it across the country. Again, I'm not making a claim that I found that or anything like that. I'm just saying you cannot possibly know. And we've heard claims that people voted for, put in this person's name and another person's name has come up, etc. What we're trying to protect here is the consistency of the ballot itself. The only way you do that is if you have them pre-printed. Then the top one, and they all came out the same, is going to be the same as the bottom one. You don't know. There's glitches. We've had cases where people have gotten the wrong ballot type in a vote center, and so. But in order to do that hand-marked paper ballot, you have to be in a precinct. And you have to have machines if you're in a vote center, the flip side of that. And then you do have where you have to have another thing is e-poll books, because you have to make sure that Dave didn't vote on one side of town, the county, and then go vote on the other side of the county in the same election. So now we've put our voter registration applications and everything online. We have to have them network connected anyway. And so that's a vulnerability, and it just goes, then you need more technology. And it seems like the idea here is that more technology will fix technology. That seems like a circular argument to me. And I think if we have the just registration and applications in a precinct that you don't have to check all over the place, you're in better shape. You know your voters. The precinct workers know who's coming in. They understand what the street names are in their district, and they are in their precinct, and people vote accordingly.
Yeah. Would it be helpful if we didn't have so many days to vote? This like 2-week voting period of early voting, and then you have election day. Would it not be easier if we just had one election day, or maybe at the most, 3?
It would be easier for everyone. Number one, it would be easier on the election workers. I feel sorry for them in a lot of ways because they are under a lot of pressure. They feel like they've been under a lot of scrutiny. Most of those people are just really great patriots that have worked the polls for a long time. We are complicating their job by adding layers and layers of things for them to do and time. And you're right. We have some of the shorter early voting. I mean, some states are up to like 45 days, but 2 weeks of early voting makes it an election season.
Yeah.
Our state constitution defines the election day as the election day. Okay. Second Tuesday, November ends on that day. It doesn't go beyond that. And I think that we are compromising when we add all these days. We have hardship accommodations through the absentee ballot for the hardships. More people, I think, would vote. You remember, I'm sure, in the days where we stood in line on election day. And we have great laws where we give people time off work so that they
make it a holiday. Make it a state holiday.
I'd make it a holiday in a heartbeat. It would solve so many problems.
Absolutely. So in Tennessee right now, with where we stand for the upcoming election and what you know, and I know we probably can't cover everything you know in an hour, but what are your biggest concerns about the upcoming election? Is there anything that we've left out that you want to talk about as far as concerns for the upcoming election?
Well, I think that one thing we don't talk enough about is the presence of non-government organizations that have gotten themselves involved in our elections. They're involved in training our people. Oh, yeah, that was a piece of legislation we tried really hard. I don't know if you've ever heard of Zuckerbucks,
Oh, yeah.
2020. That was really made famous in Wisconsin. Well, we have new forms of Zuckerbucks where we passed laws that said the county can't take money, but they didn't say they couldn't spend money on these organizations. So we have counties that belong to groups that are very far left that are doing things that are training our people, and our people are buying into this stuff. There's a whole network of these groups. They've been having meetings for 3 years with election workers around the country. They have conferences. A lot of our people have participated in them. They've created a new organization called the Workforce Advisory Council. That was the election group in the Brennan Center. One of our election administrators, the head of our in Tennessee, and I won't mention the county, is on the advisory council for that in order to create a new workforce, a new kind of workforce. And I'm concerned about the kinds of training that they get. We tried to rein that in by saying that they had to let everyone know, we want only our people to train our people. We don't need the election center, the Brennan Center, George Soros and Bill Gates training our people. But it was hard. It was hard to get. They want to go to these conferences. The election administrators actually fought the legislation because they wanted to be able to go to these conferences. And so the law was passed that if they go to conferences, they have to, if it's out of state, they have to say who paid for it, who was there, and they have to report it to the state coordinator of elections. But there's a lot more work to be done on who trains our people, because if they're being told, for instance, that, and there's this thing out there saying that election workers are being threatened, we call it hits, that there's harassment, intimidation, and threats coming from people like you and me. And so they want to fight poll watchers. They don't want us in there. And they're being trained that this is a real thing. We had CISA, which is part of the Department of Homeland Security, spying on us in the last election. They outsourced that to a non-government organization called CIS. Sounds a lot like a government organization, but they outsourced censoring our speech, censoring a lot of information.
So exactly what does our state election commission do? I mean, this sounds to me like the stuff our state election commission, I don't know that we need new laws. I think we need a state election commission that actually does something. This shouldn't be allowed. I mean, our state is supposed to run the elections, and I would think they would be responsible for providing the training. I don't see why the training that you get is not something that's certified. Are these organizations certified by our state or approved by our state?
No, these are organizations they join, and a lot of them are affirmed by the Election Administration Commission, which is very left of center. That was put together by Congress. I mean, you go to their meetings. I've watched their meetings, and they talk about everything except the real things that are happening that are problems, like voter rolls. They don't want to talk about that.
Right.
And they're lawfare people, and they're very. I won't name them, but a lot more of them are left of center, and they're in our state. And to be honest, we've had a real uptick in this activity in the last 3 years. Again, you can't always blame everybody saying, why are we doing this? You got to see it coming, and then you got to start, tracking it, getting data to show where it's happening, like the data mining on the college campuses. That was a white paper. Nobody knew that was happening. Heather Honey out of Pennsylvania did a white paper on this. I happened to see it. I was talking about it in a meeting. A Board of Regents member heard me. He was shocked. So I gave it to Tim Rudd. He was shocked. Even Tim Rudd didn't know. I mean, Mark Goines said, oh no, until he read it. And so that was the impetus to get this passed. This is the thing, it's an ecosystem. And there's a lot of people that don't be threatened by volunteers and people that are citizens. They're plugged into what's going on across the country, and they can kind of find out things that we might not see coming. Tennessee's a great state. We have a lot of great laws. We do a lot of things really, really right, but we're not always in tune with what's going on everywhere else. And Election Integrity Network is the one who really brought a lot of this stuff to us, and we were surprised what we found. So you can't be everywhere all the time. And the other problem is when you say this is we've got to remember none of these election officials are elected. They're all appointees.
Right.
And so it's kind of hard to get things done.
True. Now, and I think you know this, and maybe help me make sure I'm saying this the right way. So I think about 2017 or early 2017, before Trump was inaugurated, during the Obama administration, Obama was still in office and Jay Johnson was still the head of Homeland Security, and there was something done that basically made our elections part of the, I think the correct term was security infrastructure.
Infrastructure.
Yeah, and so now that means part of the critical infrastructure. Elections are part of the critical infrastructure. So that means we now have, and I don't know all how this manifests itself, but that means DHS is going to be involved with elections some way, shape, or form, whether it's just monitoring or whatever. But then again, a lot of, the way things are set up, it's supposed to be the states that run elections, and it concerns me that DHS, another federal agency, has deemed elections part of critical infrastructure that they've just got to have their paws involved with. Can you talk about that, Amy?
Yeah, I can. It's a horrible thing, and that's where CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, swallow that one and say it 5 times fast. That was created in 2018 and put under the control of the Department of Homeland Security. We want to see that go away. We wanted it defunded this year. We fought against that. That's where, on a federal level, having people like the Election Integrity Network, which works with the Foundation for Government Accountability, Heritage, you can go on, they've worked really, really hard to bring these cases forward to say, what does critical infrastructure even mean? That wasn't, like you said, it was an Obama. It was one of his last things that he did. It doesn't mean we have to buy into it. They can call it whatever they want to call it, but it's up to the states to decide. Just like with the Biden EO, we don't have to cooperate with these non-government orgs and these federal agencies. They have to do it our way. And I think we have to be brave enough to say, stop me. You're not the boss of me. You talk about nullification. There's nothing in the federal law that forces us to use these machines. There's nothing in the federal law that says that these organizations have a say in how we do anything. Everybody, what did Ronald Reagan say? The scariest words in the English language is, I'm here from the government and I'm here to help.
Absolutely. It's only gotten worse since that time.
It has. I totally agree with you. And I think that our voice being with fair elections on that EIN task forces and working groups, we're wanting to have our voice heard. That's how Chip Roy came forward. That's how the ACE Act is going. We're pressing very hard with the EAC because we don't want them entangled, and we want the EAC to do their job and not just create new technology, but to talk about things that, did we lose in one generation the capacity to fill out a ballot? Did we lose in one generation the capacity to have election offices order ballots, to put a security marking on a ballot since 2020? Did we forget? Well, these are things we can't have that kind of collective amnesia. We got to go back. Not everything that glitters is gold. Not everything that says is technology is progress.
Right, absolutely. You mentioned audits earlier. Have there been any this year, or how many have there been this year in Tennessee?
Well, it depends what you mean by audit. There's a new bill that was passed a couple of years ago that is to me, it's a very limited audit. It's called risk limiting audit, RLA. And actually, if you do those on a ballot marking device, I mean, all these technology words, BMD, RLAs, I mean, it just gets to be alphabet soup. But as you dig deep into it, the guy who invented the risk limiting audit says you can't even do one on a ballot marking device. And that's what we use here in Williamson County. He does not advise them. The problem with a risk limiting audit is you take a certain percentage of all the ballots and you only audit them. And you do, it's sort of like Monte Carlo kind of a thing, okay, well, you did that many, so it's probably right. The problem is it's not a total audit, number one. And number two, you're only auditing counts of ballots. You're not auditing the whole process. There's nobody that comes in that I know of and audits every aspect of your election, checking the voter rolls, everything I say. Are they authenticating that the voter rolls are right? Are they authenticating that the ballots didn't misfire? Are they authenticate the count? We can't start just with the count. And I think that some of the things we've recommended are more robust audits. And that's why we want that bill that gives us access to those ballots.
And who is that the bill that Jody Barrett had in the House, or was that a different bill?
That was a different bill. The audit bills, like I said, there was one passed a few years ago, but it only audits. It has to be, I believe, a state election. It has to be contested. The actual machines that are going to be audited are selected ahead of time. And they're selected by the people who are going to be doing the audit. It's better than nothing, but it's not what I would call robust.
Okay.
And how do you do that with a microvote?
Right.
On a tape.
Any other thoughts or concerns about our upcoming elections?
I think that we need as many poll watchers. If anybody's listening to this, we are training poll watchers all the time. Tennessee Fair Elections does it through Zoom. We do it for a lot of organizations across the state. I am concerned that we've gotten pushback from some political parties. The GOP itself is not. We're wanting them to take a stand and really push. It's the RNC's whole mission. One of their huge missions this year are poll workers and poll watchers. I just talked to Christina Bobb, who is from the RNC now, and she asked me what our position is in the state. She's hoping that our state GOP will take a position that poll watchers should be used in every single county, and we have them trained and ready to be deployed. But the way the law works in the state of Tennessee is that the political party can assign them, or it can be an organization that is a group of concerned citizens, or it can be the actual candidate. If we've had problems where the party won't approve them, and then when you get to the getting a group approved, we've gotten pushback. I have no idea why. These people are trained. We've been doing it for 3 years. We were told that you have to be chartered. You have to have a 501c3, but the law doesn't say that. It says any group of citizens that are concerned about the integrity of the election. And we've proven ourselves. So we're hoping that we can get the GOP in the state of Tennessee to make a statement as the SEC and say, we want our counties to get as many poll watchers as they can and poll workers and into these election offices, because when you have eyes on every ballot, everybody feels more confident.
So who in the SEC is pushing back? Is it the chairman, Scott Golden?
It's not the SEC, it's individual counties that don't understand. And so we're asking if the directive came from the top, we think we would just eliminate the problem. So Christina Bobb has asked if I would work with her. I got a message today from Christina Norton, who's also with the RNC, and they're asking for states to get on board as RNC with poll watchers and to train poll watchers and poll workers.
Okay, but the state SEC has not said.
Well, they haven't. Well, I'm just now approaching that. I'm thinking that they're probably going to hear about it on their own, and I have no reason to believe that they wouldn't come on board with that. We have some great people on the SEC.
Yeah, we do have some. I guess I misunderstood you initially. I thought when you said the state party, I'm thinking the SEC.
Well, it's the individual counties that
gotcha.
they're not quite understanding the need. So I am concerned about that.
Is it a mixture of, rural counties, metro counties, or
It's a mix.
any pattern?
No, it's a mix. We've had problems since 2021. I think part of the problem was, poll watchers were involved with the Dominion issue in Williamson County. I think they thought we were there for a gotcha. Watchers aren't there for gotcha.
Right.
Poll watchers are there to help.
Yeah. Okay. Well, hey, thanks for coming on. Thanks for all the great information. Thanks for what you and Andrea do and the rest of them, and keep up the good work. I want to thank you all for taking the time to watch our program tonight. Please be sure to hit the like and subscribe button. The subscribe button, please hit the subscribe button. We do need to pick up some more subscriptions to make this thing be able to stay on the air, please. Also, the notification bell so that you never miss a show. The Tennessee Informer is also available to listen to as an audio podcast on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Spreaker, and other popular podcast platforms. You can find links to them on our website at TennesseeInformer.com. While you're there, take a minute to sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter as well. Just search for @TNInformer. Share us with your friends. Next Monday night, June 17th, our guest will be Monica Irvine, State Senate candidate, District 6, challenging establishment incumbent Becky Massey. And then on Tuesday, June 18th, Chris Morris, Giles County GOP chair and SEC member, will join us to talk about problems in the SEC and the whole non-bona fide issue that we have. Hope you'll join us. That's it for now. Good night from Paris, Tennessee, that is.